The Whispering World Part 1. The Silence and the Sound Chapter 1. The Fall from the Sky. The world for 10-year-old Leo was a smear of green rushing past the window of the small passenger plane. Below, the Peruvian Amazon sprawled like a rumpled, endless blanket. A mosaic of every shade of green imaginable. Was bored. His 7-year-old sister Mia was not. She sat beside him, utterly absorbed, her sketchbook open on her lap, a crayon clutched in her small hand. She was trying to capture the likeness of a brilliant blue and yellow macaw she'd seen in a book. Its feathers a riot of primary colors. The journey was supposed to be an adventure, a flight from Iquitos to a remote research outpost to meet their parents. Mark and Elena, both botanists on a year-long expedition. The hum of the Antonov An-2's single engine was a monotonous drone. It's a sound that had lulled most of the dozen other passengers to sleep. The air inside the cabin was stuffy and warm, tasting faintly of stale coffee and recycled breath. Then the world tilted. Sudden, violent shudder ripped through the fuselage, jolting Leo from his stupor. Mia's crayon skittered across the page. Outside, the placid green sea had vanished, replaced by a bruised, churning sky. Rain began to lash against the small windows. The cabin lights flickered, died, then flashed on again, casting the terrified faces of the other passengers in stark, strobing relief. A sound began, a low groan that escalated into a high-pitched scream of tortured metal, a sound that vibrated through the floor and up their spines.
Leo.
Mia's voice was a thin thread against the roaring chaos. He grabbed her hand, his own slick with sweat. The plane dropped, a sickening lurch that left their stomachs behind. A lightning strike, blinding and instantaneous, illuminated a crack spreading across the wing like a spiderweb. Then, with a deafening report, the wing tore away. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of wind, noise, and pressure. The sensation was not of falling, but of being violently expelled, sucked out into the cold, screaming air to miles above the jungle. Leo held tight to Mia's hand, a single point of contact in a universe that had come undone. Then, as abruptly as it began, everything went black. Silence. The first thing Leo registered was the silence. It was a thick, heavy blanket, a stark contrast to the mechanical fury of the crash. Then slowly, the sounds of the jungle seeped in. It was a symphony of the unseen. The high-pitched electric hum of cicadas that could reach the volume of a lawnmower. The chirps and croaks of countless frogs. The rustle of leaves, and in the distance, a sound like a strong wind blowing through a tunnel, the territorial call of a howler monkey. The air was heavy, saturated with the pungent, loamy smell of decay and life, of wet earth and rotting vegetation. A smell so thick you could almost taste it. He was still strapped into his seat, which lay canted at a bizarre angle, cushioned by a thick bed of ferns. Pain bloomed in his shoulder, and a warm trickle of blood ran down his forehead. He unbuckled himself, his movements clumsy, and staggered to his feet. All around him, the jungle was a cathedral of green. The canopy so dense it blotted out the sky, filtering the light into a dim, murky twilight. Twisted pieces of the plane were scattered like metallic seeds, already looking alien in this world of vibrant, aggressive life. His first and only thought was a frantic, repeating mantra. Mia Chapter 2. The wreckage as refuge. He found her not 10 yards away, also still strapped in her seat, which had landed upright as if waiting for a passenger. She was unconscious, a nasty gash on her leg, but she was breathing. The relief was so profound it buckled his knees. He knelt beside her, shaking her gently. Mia, wake up. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was only confusion. Then terror flooded her face as memory returned. She began to cry, silent, racking sobs that shook her small frame. Leo, despite his own fear, knew he had to be the older brother. He hugged her tightly, the shared trauma, a grim, unbreakable bond. "It's okay," he whispered, the words feeling hollow and absurd. "We're okay." For the first day, they didn't stray far from the wreckage. The mangled fuselage, a monument to their terror, paradoxically, became their first shelter. It was a piece of their old world, a shield against the overwhelming strangeness of the new one. Their survival instincts, clumsy and unpracticed, began to kick in. They were not survivalists, were children from the city, but they were resourceful. Their first priority was comfort and safety. Remembering how cold the ground felt, Leo dragged seat cushions from the wreckage, creating a padded, insulated floor to protect them from the damp earth. Metal, he somehow knew, was a terrible insulator and would suck the warmth right out of them. They found 2 of the thin airline blankets, which they wrapped around themselves. Miraculously, Mia's small backpack was snagged on a piece of twisted metal. Inside, along with her sketchbook, was a half-eaten bag of hard candies. This small treasure, a forgotten treat from the airport, came their first meal. A tiny burst of sugar and normalcy in a world gone mad. The parallel to the famous survival story of Julianne Kopke, who survived on a bag of sweets, was lost on them. But the effect was the same. A small store of life-sustaining calories. Rummaging through the debris, they made another critical find, a standard aircraft first aid kit. It contained antiseptic wipes, which they used to clean their cuts, and bandages to cover them. They even found a life raft survival pack, though most of its contents were a mystery. There was a flare gun that looked like a toy pistol, and a small bottle of tablets with a picture of a water drop on it. They set these aside, unsure of their purpose, but sensing their importance. The first night was an ordeal. As dusk descended, the jungle's volumes swelled into a deafening chorus. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, sounded like a predator. They huddled together inside a jagged opening in the fuselage, shivering despite the humidity. Mosquitoes, a maddening, whining legion, descended upon them, their bites raising itchy welts on any exposed skin. They were utterly vulnerable to small, warm bodies in a vast, indifferent wilderness that was brutally, terrifyingly alive. Chapter 3. Downstream. After 2 days, a new enemy asserted itself, more pressing than the fear of jaguars or the misery of insect bites: thirst. The small bottles of water from the plane were long gone. The hard candies were reduced to a sticky residue at the bottom of the bag. The hope of a swift rescue, of hearing the chop of a helicopter, was fading with the daylight. They had to move. Leo's mind, frantically searching for a plan, snagged on a memory. It was a survival show his dad loved to watch. A man with a British accent eating grubs and sleeping inside a camel. One phrase stuck out, a simple rule the man repeated in every episode. If you're lost, find water. Always follow water downstream. It's your road out of the wilderness. It was a fragile thread of logic, but it was all they had. They left the relative security of the fuselage, taking their salvaged treasures with them. The blankets, the first aid kit, the mysterious tablets, and Mia's sketchbook. They soon found a small, gurgling stream, its water brown and murky. Leo remembered the tablets. He filled their empty water bottles, dropped a tablet in each, and they waited, watching the water clear with a sense of awe. They drank cautiously at first, then greedily. It was the first real victory, a small act of control in a world of chaos. They also learned to collect the frequent rainfall, bending the huge, waxy leaves of jungle plants into funnels to direct the clean water into their mouths. Food was a harder problem. Their hunger was a constant gnawing ache. They saw bright, tempting fruits everywhere, but a deep-seated caution. A memory of parental warnings about unknown berries held them back. Their first breakthrough came when Mia spotted a familiar-looking fruit growing on a thick vine. It was round and wrinkled, and when they broke it open, the pulpy, seed-filled interior was unmistakable. "Passion fruit," she exclaimed, her voice filled with the joy of recognition. They had eaten maracuya at a market in Lima. They devoured it, the sweet tart flavor an explosion on their tongues. This small success emboldened them. They began to experiment, cautiously tasting other fruits, learning to identify the rich purple berries of the AA palm and the hard-shelled Brazil nuts that were a challenge to open. Their first shelter away from the plane was a clumsy affair. Following another half-remembered tip from the TV show, they built a lean-to. They found a large, fallen log and leaned sturdy branches against it at a 45-degree angle, creating a triangular space. They thatched this frame with overlapping layers of broad leaves, hoping to keep out the rain. They learned quickly to build on a slight incline, away from the stream bank. After a sudden downpour turned their first campsite into a muddy puddle. The jungle was a relentless teacher. They learned to walk carefully, using a stick to push aside vegetation and avoid grabbing plants with stinging thorns. They had a terrifying encounter with a pit viper, its triangular head and coiled body a frozen tableau of death just feet from their path. They backed away slowly, their hearts hammering. They learned the agony of the bullet ant, an inch-long insect whose sting felt exactly like its name, a searing, all-consuming pain that lasted for a full day. And they learned the simple, vital ritual of shaking out their makeshift shoe scraps of seat fabric tied around their feet with wiring every morning. After Mia found a large, hairy spider nestled inside one. They were learning the hard rules of their new world, one painful, terrifying, and triumphant lesson at a time. Part 2. The Whispering World. Chapter 4. The Nutcrackers and the First Friend. Months bled into a year. The children's initial shock and terror had subsided, replaced by the dull, constant ache of hunger and the wearying rhythm of survival. They had grown leaner, their skin tanned and scratched, their city softness burned away by the relentless sun and toil. Their greatest frustration was the abundance of hard-shelled nuts they found on the forest floor. A treasure trove of protein and fat locked away in impenetrable fortresses. Their breakthrough came not from a memory, but from an observation. They had been tracking a troop of brown-throated capuchin monkeys, fascinated by their noisy acrobatic society. These monkeys, considered among the most intelligent of all New World primates, were a constant source of entertainment and information. One day, the children watched as an older monkey selected a flat, sturdy rock for an anvil, placed a nut upon it, and then, with surprising precision, brought another rounded stone down upon it with a sharp crack. It was a revelation. This was not random smashing. It was a technique, a skill passed down through social learning. Young capuchins themselves spend years mastering this skill, often by playing with the tools and nut fragments left behind by proficient adults. After the troop moved on, Leo and Mia rushed to the abandoned anvil site. They gathered their own stones and, imitating the monkeys, began to practice. Their first attempts were clumsy, resulting in bruised fingers and nuts skittering away into the undergrowth. But eventually, a satisfying crack echoed through the trees. They had unlocked the secret. The rich, oily meat of the nut was the most satisfying thing they had ever tasted. It was during these nut-cracking sessions that they met Pico. He was a juvenile capuchin, smaller than the others, with a perpetually curious and mischievous expression. While the rest of the troop remained wary, Pico was intrigued by the two strange, hairless apes who had adopted their customs. He would linger after the others had left, watching them. Slowly, a friendship formed, built on a shared language of gesture and intent. The children learned that Pico's submissive grin, lips apart, mouth corners downturned, was not a sign of aggression, but a signal that he was not a threat. They came to recognize his play face, a relaxed, open-mouthed expression that invited a chase or a game. In return, Pico learned that holding out a tiny hand would often result in a piece of their hard-won nut, a perfect example of the food solicitation gesture seen in his own kind. He became their shadow, their companion, and their guide, often leading them to new fruit trees with his excited chattering. Chapter 5. The River Guardians. As the years passed, their survival became more sophisticated. Their simple lean-to evolved into a more permanent home. They found a spot on a high, dry bank overlooking a bend in the river, safe from flash floods. Here, they constructed a sturdy A-frame shelter. They used forked trees as the main supports for a long ridgepole, then leaned smaller logs against it to form the walls. They lashed the joints together with tough, pliable vines. For the roof, they wove a thick mat of overlapping palm fronds, creating a surprisingly waterproof barrier. Crucially, they built a raised platform bed inside, getting them off the damp ground which leached body heat and teemed with insects. This shelter became their fortress, their home base in the vast green wilderness. They were not alone. Their home was watched over by a pair of magnificent scarlet macaws, Mia named Ruby and Sky. Like all macaws, they were mated for life, a bond visible in the way they flew so close their wings almost touched. These birds were incredibly intelligent and social, and their raucous, screeching calls became the children's early warning system. The macaws' sharp eyes would spot a stealthy jaguar long before the children could, and their piercing shrieks would send Leo and Mia scrambling for the safety of their shelter. The children learned the nuances of their calls, the squawk that meant danger, the softer chatter of flock communication, the unique calls they used to identify each other. Mia, with her keen ear, even learned to mimic some of the sounds, creating a rudimentary language with their avian sentinels. Their other guardian was a far more placid creature. Snuffles was a lowland tapir, a solitary, shy animal that looked like a strange cross between a pig and an elephant. He was a creature of habit, using the same paths to the river each day. At first, he would bolt at the sight of them, but over time he grew accustomed to their presence. Tapirs, while generally docile, are powerful and can defend themselves with strong jaws if threatened. But the children posed no threat. One day, seeing him tormented by ticks, Mia cautiously approached and began to pick them off his tough hide. The tapir stood perfectly still, occasionally emitting a soft whistling sound. From then on, a quiet friendship was forged. Snuffles would allow them to scrub his back in the shallows, and eventually, to clamber onto his broad, sturdy back. He became their living ferry, carrying them safely across rivers that were too deep or swift to cross on foot, his prehensile snout occasionally breaking the surface like a snorkel. Chapter 6. A Language of Their Own. 15 years after the crash, the children were gone. In their place stood a young man and a young woman, forged by the jungle. Leo, now 25, was lean and muscular, his movements economical and sure. Mia, at 22, was lithe and observant, her eyes constantly scanning the canopy. The English they once spoke was a distant echo, fragmented and reshaped by years of isolation. They had, without realizing it, created their own language. Linguists call this phenomenon idioglossia, or cryptophagia, a private language that sometimes develops between twins or siblings in extreme isolation. It is not a true new language, but a fusion of the familiar and the invented. Theirs was a patchwork tongue. It had the bones of English grammar, but the vocabulary was a hybrid. A jaguar was a soft foot growl. Rain was skywater. They incorporated the sharp squawks of Ruby and Sky for warnings, friendly lip smacks of Pico for greetings, and a complex vocabulary of hand gestures. Some remembered from their past, others learned from the monkeys. This language was the ultimate expression of their bond, a secret code that defined their two-person world. But it also built a wall between them and the human society they had all but forgotten. They were no longer just surviving. They were masters of their domain. Leo, after countless failures, had crafted a powerful bow from a seasoned piece of yew wood, its string woven from durable plant fibers. His arrows were fletched with the molted tail feathers of Ruby and Sky, their vibrant colors a flash of beauty on a deadly tool. He could hunt small game with silent accuracy. For fishing, they used a four-pronged spear carved from a single stalk of bamboo, designed brutally effective in the clear shallows. Their knowledge of the local ethnobotany was now profound. Cut was not just cleaned. It was sealed with the thick red latex of the Sangre de Drago tree, which dried into a protective, skin-like barrier, a natural bandage. For a toothache or a painful scrape, they would chew the leaves of the cordoncillo plant, which had a numbing anesthetic effect. Their diet was that of true hunter-gatherers, a rich and varied intake of fruits like passion fruit, and guava, nuts and seeds, fish from the river, and protein-rich insects like the large, fatty Chantacuda larvae they roasted over the fire. This diet, free from processed foods, refined sugars, and excessive sodium, had shaped their very physiology, making them incredibly lean and healthy, as though with potential hidden vulnerabilities they could not yet imagine. Chapter 7. The Rhythms of the World. The jungle, once a place of terror, had become a world of deep and abiding wonder. The fear was still there, healthy respect for the jaguar's stealth and the viper's venom, but it was now balanced by a profound sense of belonging. They had learned the rhythms of their world, and in doing so had found moments of breathtaking beauty. One moonless night, chasing a firefly, Mia stumbled and kicked at the thick layer of dead leaves on the forest floor. To her astonishment, the ground where her foot had landed erupted in a faint, ghostly green light. Leo rushed over, and together they began to shuffle their feet, painting glowing patterns in the darkness. They had discovered the forest's secret light, a vast, hidden network of bioluminescent fungi, likely a species of mycena, whose mycelium threaded through the decaying leaf litter, waiting for a disturbance to reveal its otherworldly glow. These glowing nights became a private magic show, a silent, living constellation at their feet. They witnessed the great butterfly migrations, when for a few days each year, the air would become a silent, flowing river of color. Thousands upon thousands of butterflies would drift through the trees, a kaleidoscope of species. Most spectacular were the blue morphos, whose wings were not pigmented but covered in microscopic scales that refracted light, creating an iridescent, metallic blue. As they flew, the flashing contrast between the brilliant blue of their upper wings and the dull, ice-spotted brown of their undersides created an illusion of appearing and disappearing. A fleet of phantoms dancing through the sun-dappled air. Having no memory of tag or hide and seek, they invented their own games. Their play echoing the traditions of the Amazon's indigenous children. They held archery contests seeing who could shoot a dangling fruit from a branch. They played a game they called hawk and monkey, a variation of tag where one would chase the other through the trees, with Pico often joining in as a chaotic third party. Mia became adept at weaving intricate figures from vines. A jungle version of Cat's Cradle, a game played by children in cultures across the globe. Their play was not just a pastime, it was the creation of a culture, the development of ritual and joy in their isolated world. A testament to their resilient, adaptive minds. Part 3. The Echo. Chapter 8. The Empty Room. For Mark and Alina, the world had not moved on. It had frozen on that terrible day 15 years ago. The initial search had been a massive international effort. Planes and helicopters crisscrossed the vast green expanse of the Peruvian Amazon. Search teams hacked their way through the impenetrable jungle. They found pieces of the planest section of wing here, piece of landing gear there scattered over miles, testament to a violent mid-air disintegration. But they found no survivors, no bodies. After months, the official search was called off. The children were declared lost, presumed dead. But for their parents, there was no resolution. They were trapped in a state of ambiguous loss, psychological limbo that is in many ways more torturous than confirmed death. How do you mourn a ghost? How do you hold a funeral for a hope? They were plagued by symptoms of complicated grief, anxiety, and deep, persistent depression. Their children's bedrooms remained untouched. Museums of a life abruptly paused. A half-finished drawing on Mia's desk, a soccer jersey draped over Leo's chair. Every object was a fresh stab of pain, a reminder of the life that should have been. The world told them to move on, but they couldn't. Instead, they channeled their grief into a furious, desperate hope. They sold their home, liquidated their assets, and poured every penny into creating the Lost Wings Foundation, a small, non-profit dedicated to one single, obsessive purpose: to keep searching. They became experts in jungle survival, cartography, and search hand rescue technology, corresponding with experts funding small expeditions, and clinging to the thinnest slivers of possibility. Their hope was not a gentle flame, it was a raging fire that consumed their lives, the only thing that kept the crushing darkness at bay. Chapter 9. The Eye in the Sky and the Carved Messenger. 15 years on, they launched their final, most ambitious search. It was a long shot, a last roll of the dice fueled by a new generation of technology. They hired a specialized team equipped with a state-of-the-art drone. This wasn't just a camera in the sky. It carried a dual payload, a high-resolution thermal imager, and a sophisticated LiDAR system. The thermal camera offered glimpses of life. In the cool of the pre-dawn hours, it could detect the heat signatures of tapirs wading in the rivers and troops of monkeys moving through the canopy. But the dense, humid jungle was a challenge. The thick foliage acted like a blanket, masking much of what lay beneath. The real hope lay with the LiDAR. LiDAR light detection and ranging works by firing hundreds of thousands of laser pulses per second. While most are reflected by the canopy, a fraction find their way through the gaps, bouncing off the ground below and returning to the sensor. Over millions of data points, a detailed 3D map of the forest floor emerges, stripping away the vegetation to reveal the true topography. For weeks, the drone flew systematic grid patterns, accumulating terabytes of data. The initial analysis revealed the main crash site, the metallic signature of the fuselage and engines now covered in moss and vines, a scar being slowly healed by the jungle. Then, kilometers downstream, the algorithm flagged an anomaly. It was a small clearing, and in its center, a structure. It was clearly man-made, with the distinct A-frame shape of a shelter. Yet it didn't correspond to any known indigenous village or illegal logging camp. It was a ghost on the map. Unbeknownst to them, a second, far more primitive clue was already making its way to civilization. Months earlier, a teenage Mia, who had discovered a talent for carving with a sharpened piece of fuselage metal, had crafted a small, charmingly lopsided wooden tapir for Leo, while playing by the river. He had dropped it, and the current had snatched it away. Weeks later, and hundreds of miles downstream, an ethnobotany research team, studying medicinal plants along the riverbank, found the small carving washed up in the mud. It was clearly not an ancient artifact, nor did it resemble the style of any local tribes. Intrigued by the mystery, the lead researcher sent it to a lab for forensic analysis. The results were baffling. Microscopic analysis identified the wood as a local species, but radiocarbon dating confirmed it had been carved from a living tree within the last 2 decades. Furthermore, analysis of the tool mark suggested it had been whittled with a sharp but primitive tool, not a modern steel knife. The carving was an impossibility, a whisper from a place that wasn't supposed to exist. When news of the strange artifact reached the Lost Wings Foundation, it collided with the LiDAR data. The impossible clue in the high-tech anomaly pointed to the same stretch of river. Hope, which had been flickering, roared back to life. Chapter 10. The Reunion. The sound was wrong. It was a deep, rhythmic hump that didn't belong to the jungle's symphony. It grew louder, a violent intrusion that vibrated in their chests. High in the canopy, Ruby and Sky erupted in frantic, piercing shrieks of alarm. Pico and his troop chattered in fear and vanished into the higher branches. Leo and Mia, reacting with the ingrained instinct of 15 years, grabbed their spears and melted into the dense undergrowth beside their shelter, their bodies still, their eyes wide. A monstrous, metallic dragonfly descended from the sky, hovering over the river. Men in strange, bulky clothing slid down ropes. Invaders. Leo tightened his grip on his spear, his knuckles white. A voice, amplified and metallic, echoed across the clearing. "Leo, Mia, can you hear us?" The names were like stones dropped into a deep well, sending ripples through forgotten parts of their minds. They were familiar, yet alien. The men advanced slowly, cautiously. Leo and Mia remained frozen, hidden, a pair of wild creatures ready to fight or flee. Then, a different voice came from the machine, a woman's voice. "Leo, cub, Mia, ... My little starling, it's Mom. We're here. We've come to take you home." The nicknames. The forgotten pet names from a life before the fall. The sound of that voice, layered with years of pain and hope, broke through the jungle-grown walls around their hearts. Mia let out a small, choked sob. Leo lowered his spear, his body trembling. They stepped out of the shadows. The reunion was not the clean, joyful embrace of a movie. It was a collision of worlds, a moment of staggering, overwhelming complexity. Mark and Alina saw not the small children they had lost, but to tanned, scarred, wild-looking young adults, clad in makeshift clothes, holding primitive weapons. Their eyes, so full of a fierce, self-reliant intelligence, were the eyes of strangers. And for Leo and Mia, the invaders were ghosts made real. They smelled wrong of soap and chemicals and processed fabric. Their language was a torrent of incomprehensible sounds. But the faces matched the faded, water-damaged photographs they had kept in a salvaged metal box for 15 years. Alina rushed forward and her arms wrapped around Mia. The touch was strange. The embrace unfamiliar, but the scent of her mother, a deeply buried memory, unlocked something primal. Tears streamed down Mia's face, washing away years of jungle dust. Leo stood stiffly as his father approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. The touch was hesitant, full of a 15-year chasm of unspoken words and unimaginable experiences. It was a beginning, but a beginning steeped in the profound, aching loss of all that had been taken from them. Blog. 2 homes. 1 year later, the world was still allowed. It's a confusing place for Leo and Mia. Their reintegration into society was a slow, often painful process, a journey far more challenging than their trek through the jungle. The modern world was a sensory assault of harsh lights, jarring noises, and strange smells. Their immune systems honed to fight Amazonian microbes were utterly unprepared for the common cold, leaving them perpetually sniffly and sick. Processed food tasted either bland or sickeningly sweet. They craved the tartness of wild fruit and the clean taste of river fish. Their hunter-gatherer diet had left them with the metabolic health of athletes, but it also resulted in lower bone density due to a long-term lack of calcium from dairy, a paradox that baffled their doctors. Language was the highest barrier. While they had each other, a support system that other famous cases of isolated children like Jeannie Wiley tragically lacked. Their shared cryptophagia made relearning fluent English a monumental task. Their minds thought in the grammar of the jungle, a language of sounds, gestures, and direct intent. The abstract complexities of English often eluded them. But their ending was not a tragedy. It was a beautiful, complex synthesis. Mark and Elena, seeing their children's profound connection to the wild, realized they could never truly leave the jungle behind. And so, they didn't. The Lost Wings Foundation was reborn as the Canopy Keepers Foundation, conservation and research center established on a massive tract of land that included the children's riverbank home. It was a place where both of their worlds could coexist. Leo, with his unparalleled knowledge of the forest's inner workings, became an invaluable guide and partner to visiting scientists. His insights into animal behavior and tracking skills far surpassing anything they could learn from a textbook. Mia, channeling her artistic soul, became a celebrated wildlife illustrator. Her drawings, born from a lifetime of intimate observation, captured the spirit of the jungle's creatures with a truth and vitality no photograph ever could. Mark and Elena found a new purpose, managing the foundation, turning their personal pain into a public good. Their family was whole again, not because they had erased the past, but because they had embraced it. They had two homes now, the one of brick and mortar, and the one of leaf and vine. And sometimes, on clear nights, Leo and Mia would walk out to the edge of the protected reserve, their animal family still there. Ruby and Sky would call to them from the trees, and a young, mischievous capuchin, descendant of Pico Wood, scampered down to solicit a treat, a living link to the whispering world that had raised them.